Podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Intervention Inc., a Colorado-based nonprofit organization created in 1986, providing a range of services in the criminal and social justice system. Intervention, we provide direct offender supervision services and support for those justice-involved persons sentenced to probation or community corrections. In addition, we also provide pretrial monitoring, useful public service, and comprehensive victim services. For more information, or if you'd like to come work for us, you can visit our website at www.int-cjs.org. Our podcast, we highlight the wonderful and necessary work of the Colorado victim advocate community. There are those community-based agencies that provide services to some of the most vulnerable populations. And today we are very thankful to be speaking with Jenny Stith. She is the Executive Director of WINGS here in Jefferson County. I want to welcome you, Jenny, to our podcast.
Thank you, Randy. I'm happy to be here.
Appreciate so much being here. I would first like to start out too with folks just telling, I want you to tell folks, just tell us about the WINGS organization.
Sure. So at WINGS, we support adults who experience sexual abuse when they were children. So anyone who is over the age of 18 who experienced sexual abuse up to that point, basically. And we're really proud to work with this community of survivors, and we strive to be inclusive in who we serve. So we're here for people of all gender identities and really all aspects of who folks are. And we have a long history in Colorado going back to 1982. And really proud to be part of the victims assistance community here.
That's great, because our agency, we were created in 86. So it's wonderful to talk to those nonprofit agencies that have lasted so long through so many different types of things going on in the community, things going on in the world. And so it's wonderful to have you guys here. Really do appreciate it.
Thanks.
And so, you talked a little bit about, your client population with regards to adults who have been victimized as children through child sexual abuse. Can you talk a little bit more about that client population? Just, some of the things that your staff has seen?
Sure. Well, first of all, this is a huge community of people. Sadly, the statistics are that 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be sexually abused before they turn 18, which means, of course, that 1 in 4 women, 1 in 6 men, or we say 1 in 5 people of all gender identities have actually experienced this. Now, in our culture, I think that there's been a stigma around this issue. There's been an unspeakability about this. So there's probably far more people who've had this in their background than who've actually talked about it. And so there's a huge need to really be with that as a culture and as a community, as providers, because the need is so much greater, certainly than WINGS can't even reach right now. But it's really more of an issue than is really being given, voice. So a big part of what we do is to try to educate people about that, of, this is a huge justice issue. It's a huge health issue. So and most adult survivors have been harmed by someone that they know when they were a child, someone that they trusted. And so there's a whole lot that someone might be walking around with in terms of how this has impacted them. And they may not even realize, one, that it was sexual abuse, 2, how it might be connected to the challenges they might be experiencing today, 3, that it wasn't their fault, 4, that there's something they can actually do about it in terms of it's not too late to address this, and or how to even start that journey. So I think there's a lot to share in terms of positive news that, we believe there is a lot of healing that can happen by looking at this whenever an adult survivor might be ready. But there's also a lot of barriers to someone getting to that point. So those are some high-level thoughts, and I can go deeper in any of those areas.
Sure. And that's really great that because you brought up a lot of pieces there that I would like to bring out. I mean, first and foremost, why is it hard for adult victims to disclose abuse that occurred when they were children?
Yeah, great question. So again, because most adult survivors were abused by someone they know, trusted, might have even loved, might have even been related to, in their mind, it's really hard for a child to understand, wow, this person that I really care about, that I might even be relying on for support, is actually choosing to harm me. So there's sort of some immediate things that happen to that child, including like thinking that they did something wrong, thinking that, they asked for this or it was somehow their fault. And so they have a hard time understanding that it was abuse. Or if again, it was someone that was in the family, like it's very confusing. So, and I also feel like there's a loss of voice when a child is sexually abused, either through the person who's abusing them telling them, don't say anything, or just through the act of being violated. There's like a impulse not to speak. And so most adult survivors then don't, or most children who've been victimized don't. The stat is that only 1 in 10 are reporting as children. So that means 9 in 10 are not. And so usually what happens is decades go by and life goes on, and that trauma and that experience of abuse hasn't been addressed. And so symptoms might start developing, like depression, anxiety, substance abuse, eating disorders, even sometimes a need to be perfect, to try to control things in one's life because there was a loss of control when someone was small. But the trick is that most people who are in that situation are not connecting those challenges to what happened to them often decades ago. So there's a loss of knowledge there. And because culture has not done a good job of just normalizing this or helping people understand how common this is, that many providers aren't asking adults, hey, did this happen to you as a child? And if so, yes, it might be connected to the relationship challenges that you're having right now, the domestic violence, the additional assault, the symptoms I just mentioned. So someone who's walking around with that doesn't know what they don't know. That's a huge important point. And so, if you don't know what's impacting you, how can you get help for it? If someone were to have cancer or any other issue, like there's a psychoeducational component that's necessary for someone then to go on a journey of addressing that issue. So that not knowing is a huge piece of it. And then again, the lack of like provider options for someone in that instance is another barrier. I just think as a culture, we have not been able to embody this truth so that adult survivors have a chance to be connected to what they need. I feel like we've done better as a culture in the decades that we've talked about, since the 80s, in understanding child sexual abuse and how it impacts children. And I think that is foundational and that has to be there. And I think there's such a space to talk about, this is also an adult issue. And wherever someone is on that spectrum, there's an opportunity to heal.
And so part of that too is that with the work that you folks do there at Wings, I mean, looking at all of those things that you just unpacked right there, somebody coming to your agency, disclosing that they were abused as a child, now they're an adult. I mean, what is the Wings approach to healing, to helping them?
Great question. So we say that our approach is that one, we're survivor informed. Actually, adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse started Wings. And in fact, they were survivors of intrafamilial sexual abuse or incest, which again is a huge part of where this abuse happens.
Mhm.
We also, over the years, have brought in clinical expertise. So we've got a lot of folks who are trained in the clinical realm coming together to support our services. And then we say that we're CSA trauma informed, meaning we follow all the tenets of trauma informed practice. And we include how big of an issue this is for many adults. So all of that is integrated into our work. And we really advise adult survivors to start with a one-on-one practitioner, someone that can help them start to orient to what happened in their life, like a counselor, for that one-on-one support. And they also need to have a certain level of safety in their life to be able to go back into that trauma history. So they might need support for other life needs, like are they in safe, stable housing? Are they not in a currently abusive situation? Which again, there's a huge connection to being sexually abused as a child and then being kind of reprogrammed to be in dangerous relationships later in life. So that's real, and we need to understand that, and we need to help survivors know what starting steps they need to begin getting, into a safe place where they can go deeper into a trauma recovery experience. But again, hoping to get all of those issues addressed, then our flagship program is a support group program.
Mm.
So, and it's a complement to individual therapy, not a replacement for it. And we find that survivors that have both, like that therapeutic home base where they can go kind of deeper in their trauma experience as a home base, and then coming together in a support group with other adult survivors who are learning and healing together, really helps accelerate their healing. Um, Having said that, I think it's important to know, because this issue has been so undiscussed or
Mhm.
underdiscussed, most people who've been sexually abused as a child think that we're the only one. We think that this has not happened to anyone else. Meanwhile, it's happened to so many people. And so joining that group experience helps them see, oh, wow, I'm not alone. People, that seem similar to me or different than me, like have similar experiences. So the two things we often hear most from survivors joining our groups are, for the first time, they don't feel crazy and they
Mhm.
don't feel alone. They don't feel alone. They feel like, wow, I'm starting to understand why I've been self-medicating, why these issues are happening. Like, it wasn't my fault. I didn't ask for it. So there's so much that happens in that group container. Um, and those are, again, some primary ways that we think are supportive of healing. I think I'm starting to learn in my own journey, like there's so many other modalities that can support someone. And we hope to have like referrals on our website and through
Mhm.
like referral partner relationships that we can make additional connections for folks. But those are some of the core ways that we're trying to help be there for adult survivors.
And so a lot of, what you talked about right there is certainly, with the dynamic of survivors together, speaking about, the trauma as a way of helping them and in some ways possibly healing them. And I know that sometimes that may never occur. But in that piece right there, what are some of the additional services that you offer there at Wings?
Yeah. So the main things are, again, the customized, the confidential phone consultation. And
Oh,
sometimes we're the first place where an adult is saying, hey, this happened to me as a child and I haven't talked about it with anyone. And that's a huge step. And so just
mm,
starting to make that connection, getting them the resources that they need, and then hoping that if they're in Colorado and they have that in place, they can join a group. Our standard groups are weekly, and we
mhm,
find they're long term. It's important to know that the trauma that I've talked about that is caused by childhood sexual abuse is developmental trauma. So it's happening to someone when their brain and body are still developing. All parts of them are still developing. So when someone starts to examine that and starts to heal that, it's not a 6 session kind of thing. Our mental health model historically has sort of looked at things that way. To really heal developmental trauma, it's a longer term process. So
mhm,
our groups allow survivors to come to group on a longer term um, pathway.
mhm,
And then we have specialty groups that could look a little bit different. So we have a creative writing group that meets monthly because expression often can be really healing. We have a speak out group that we offer from time to time, and that's for survivors who are at the point of their healing journey where they want to tell their story, and
mhm.
they craft that in a short term group with other survivors. And then we have an event where they can come and tell that story on stage, invite their VIPs, and invite the Wings community. And there's a real reclaiming of their narrative. And it's often a big turning point for survivors to whom that's important. Because again, when a child is sexually abused, so much is taken away from them in terms of choice, power, voice. And so through the Speak Out program, survivors are reclaiming that. And it's
Mhm.
just really powerful to watch that transition. We do have partners in the community that we're referring to. So from time to time, we might promote a trauma sensitive yoga
Mhm.
partnership or class. We've actually been doing an equine therapy group offering this year quarterly, where we bring our group process to an equine location and introduce survivors to healing through that experience.
Incredible. Mhm.
Yeah. And then more and more, Randy, we're learning more about like what types of healing modalities are useful in different communities. For example, in communities of color and indigenous communities, are there other modalities for healing that maybe Wings doesn't provide, but we should certainly know about and we should
Mhm.
sort of honor and make available to survivors? So that's a space we're kind of learning around. But um, again, I think that educational piece is important because when you don't know something, you can't. you can't really go very far in it. So the
Hmm.
educational piece, yeah, I think we're
Well,
still.
and so talking about all those wonderful services that you provide, you talked about how sometimes they can be long-term services. Do you have folks that will remain in those groups? Because I'm sure a lot of times too, folks who might be coming to you obviously might be very hesitant. They're going to be disclosing something that was very traumatic to them, to strangers essentially. And yet, you offer programming that could be long-term. Do you have folks that will remain with you through that healing process?
Great question. We do. We encourage folks to come to group for, 4 to 6 weeks at least, because it
Mhm.
can be comfortable when you step into that group space and all of a sudden you're confronted with like, oh, did this really happen to me? We have a lot of folks that have this parking lot. Well, when we used to have more groups that were in person, we would call it a parking lot moment of,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, I'm here. And if I walk in, this is going to be real. Most of our groups are online now. So it might be a virtual moment, but it may not be for everyone, but it is very common for survivors to be with us for multiple years because life is changing as they're
Sure.
learning and integrating this knowledge. Then relationships start to shift and work and all kinds of things. They might want to go back and address the abuse history. So there's just so much to process. And I think I'm thinking of a few survivors that I know about whose group held them through such big life changes.
Mhm.
Like leaving a marriage or going and then like starting a healthier relationship and, having a whole different kind of family trajectory. So I think that's the power of understanding what adult survivors need and providing services that match that need. And that's the important, powerful point to make to people. As awful as it is to know that this happens to so many people,
Mhm.
we do believe that healing is possible. We do see that many people create great strides in healing. And so, in the victim assistance community, I think the more we can um, elevate, that type of focus, the better.
And a lot of times too, and just talking about the victim advocacy community that you and I belong to here in the First Judicial, I mean, what do you see as a forecast? Because fortunately, you guys have been around for so long, doing such great work. I mean, what do you see in the forecast of the work that you do 5 years, 10 years? I mean, what do you see that you would say, you could look back and say, that, yeah, we went for that goal and we were able to achieve it?
Such a good question. I love that forward focus. Well, for Wings since 2019, we've really been leaning into a journey to really understand um, values of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and really understanding the needs of survivors from communities that have faced historical, cultural, and identity based trauma. And I feel like understanding the need to position our work within that framework will
Mhm.
only strengthen because, you know, survivor childhood sexual abuse is happening within systemic oppression that is
Mhm.
causing this violence. And
Mhm.
so really the healing that needs to take place is multifaceted and should be embedded within practices that really address the multiple layers of trauma that an adult survivor may have. So, how do we center the needs of adult survivors who are Indigenous, who are Black, who had who don't speak English? I think these are edges for Wings, but I think to really honor our values as an organization, like I hope to see that work strengthen. And what does collective healing look like? What does, um, where we're working on a pilot initiative actually at Porchlight Family Justice Center in Jefferson County,
Mhm.
where we want to bring in a protocol to screen for the history of this trauma with a coordinated community response. Because I think this is a missing link between like existing sexual assault services and domestic violence services. So
Mhm.
many survivors have a history of childhood sexual abuse, but it usually isn't asked. And so again,
Exactly.
the opportunity to engage in healing is not being introduced in the full menu of offerings. So we're wanting to pilot that. We're wanting to really create that comprehensive look at how this shows up in people's lives and make services available. And so then I think the question is, how do we fund those services?
Uh-huh.
How do we fund specialized wraparound services for someone who has these multiple needs? How do we shift culture to understand what a big part of service provision this should actually be? When
Uh-huh.
you talk about the state of Colorado, those are places I'd like to see the conversation go and the advocacy go and the funding go, because I think what's on the line is restoring people's lives,
Uh-huh.
restoring people's like ability to thrive and to not be stuck in cycles of harm and poor health, but to actually, be able to fully heal. And um, it's possible. And we get to like create that.
I always when I'm always getting ready to close this podcast, I always like to say, an advocate, is a noun, a subject, a verb, and an adjective. And I think you've created all of those definitions for those words, and I think that's wonderful that you're doing that. But I would probably say too. So let's say, for instance, that you and I were at the Justice Center here in at Golden, and we're in an elevator and somebody asks you, well, what does Wings do? I'd like you to give us your elevator speech, to somebody that might not know anything about the wonderful work that you do.
Gosh, that's a great question. I mean, I haven't said this in a while, but it comes up as we're talking about it, that we harness the power of the human spirit. Really, this is what's wounded through childhood sexual abuse, and providing services to adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse is what we do. To do that to the level that is needed in Colorado and the world, we need to galvanize people to care. So this education piece, this advocacy piece, this like visibility piece, and this voice piece that you're extending to us is how we'll get there. So I don't know. To me, we need both. We can't do our work without the resourcing to do it. And to do the work, we have to hold as a culture that it needs to be done. So I don't know how that hits the mark, but that's what came up.
And that is a wonder. You hit the mark right on top, and that's wonderful. Jenny, I truly want to thank you for being here today with us, and certainly thank you and for all you and your team for all the work that you're doing. If you'd like more additional information about Wings and their wonderful service that they provide, please go to their website at www.wingsfound.org. And they certainly have the wonderful services there to assist folks who might be exhibiting that same type of trauma that we just talked about. The Colorado Victim Advocate podcast can be found on Spotify and our YouTube channel. And we hope that you join us for another episode. And Jenny, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks so much, Randy. It's such a pleasure.